The man vaulted over the security barrier and sprinted toward the stage just as Michael rose 30 feet into the air, standing on the small platform of a hydraulic cherry picker with both hands gripping the metal safety bars, while wind machines blasted his white shirt against his chest. Wait, because what Michael did in the next 47 seconds would be talked about for decades, and almost no one understood why he made that choice. The night had started with precision. Every cable tested, every light cue rehearsed. The International Music Awards at the Royal Arena in London had sold out in 11 minutes, and the producers had built the entire broadcast around one moment. Michael Jackson, ascending into the darkness above 15,000 people, singing a song about the world falling apart while images of forests burning and children crying played on screens the size of apartment buildings. He had performed it dozens of times before. He knew every beat, every breath, every second where the cherry picker would lift and where the wind machines would blast his shirt back against his body. What he did not know, what nobody knew, was that a man in the 14th row had been planning this moment for 3 weeks. His name was never released to the public. The official report called him an intruder, and that is what he remained in every news story that followed. But in that arena, in that fraction of a second when the spotlight swept across the crowd and caught him mid-leap over the barrier, he was something else entirely. He was a problem with no solution, hurtling toward the stage while Michael stood on that platform with nowhere to go. Notice something about the timing. The cherry picker had just reached its highest point. Michael was supposed to stay there for 90 seconds. Arms spread, voice breaking on the high notes, wind tearing at his clothes while pyrotechnics exploded in synchronized bursts around the stage. The descent wouldn't begin until the second chorus. That meant he was locked in position, visible to everyone, unable to move, and completely dependent on the crew below to bring him down safely. The intruder had either known this or gotten impossibly lucky. Security moved fast, but not fast enough. 2 guards were already running when the man hit the stage floor and kept going, heading straight for the base of the cherry picker. The backup dancers, 12 of them, frozen in formation around a mock-destroyed landscape of fallen trees and scattered debris, didn't know whether to scatter or hold position. The choreographer had drilled them for hours on what to do if Michael needed medical attention, if a light rig fell, if the pyro misfired. Nobody had ever rehearsed what to do if a stranger got past security and started climbing. From 30 feet up, Michael saw everything. The man's dark jacket, the guards converging, the dancers breaking formation, and further back, in the press pit, the flicker of a Mazda sun. 100 cameras swinging toward the chaos like flowers toward sunlight. He could feel the cherry picker shudder as someone grabbed the base structure below, and for a moment, just a moment, he tightened his grip on the safety bars and felt the sweat on his palms. Here is what the cameras did not show. Inside Michael's earpiece, 3 voices were screaming at once. The stage manager was yelling to abort the sequence. The cherry picker operator was asking whether to bring him down immediately. And somewhere in the background, a producer was shouting that they were still live, still broadcasting to 62 countries, still being watched by an estimated 400 million people who had no idea what was happening. Michael heard all of it. He also heard his own breathing, shallow and fast, and he made a decision that none of them expected. He kept singing. Look at what that choice required. His body was shaking, not from the wind machines but from adrenaline, from the knowledge that a stranger was somewhere below him and the situation was completely out of his control. His voice cracked on a high note and he pushed through it. The lyrics were about destruction, about the earth crying out, about humanity turning away from suffering. And in that moment, they felt like something else entirely. They felt like a refusal to let the chaos win. The intruder reached the cherry picker. He grabbed the metal frame and started climbing, his dark jacket flapping as he pulled himself up toward the platform where Michael stood, frozen. Security was seconds behind him, but those seconds were enough. The man's face appeared at the edge of the platform. Wild eyes, open mouth, hands gripping the safety bars just inches from Michael's feet. And then something happened that nobody expected. Michael reached down and grabbed the man's arm. Not to push him away, not to defend himself. He grabbed him because the man was slipping, because one wrong move would send him tumbling 30 feet to the stage floor, because in that fraction of a second Michael saw a human being about to fall, and his instinct was to hold on. Their eyes met. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, they stared at each other. The man stopped struggling. Michael's grip tightened. The music kept playing. The crowd kept screaming, and somewhere in the chaos, a photographer's flash went off, freezing that moment forever. Security reached the platform and pulled the man down, dragging him backward while he went limp, all the fight suddenly gone from his body. The whole confrontation lasted less than 47 seconds, but for Michael, gripping that stranger's arm while the arena lights blazed and the wind machines roared and 400 million people watched without understanding what they were seeing, those seconds stretched into something that felt like hours. And when the cherry picker finally began its descent, Michael's hands were still shaking. Remember that the show was still live. 62 countries, 400 million viewers. Michael walked to the center of the stage, stood among the backup dancers who had reformed their positions, and finished the song with his hand pressed against his chest. The final note hung in the air, and then the lights cut to black. Backstage, everything was different. Picture the corridor behind the main stage, concrete floors, industrial lighting, equipment cases stacked against the walls, crew members in black shirts moving with the kind of controlled urgency that comes from years of managing disasters in real time. Michael walked through it surrounded by bodyguards, his white shirt soaked with sweat, his hands still trembling. The show's executive producer intercepted him before he reached his dressing room, already talking about lawyers and statements and how they needed to control the narrative before the tabloids did. Michael stopped walking. He turned to the producer, a man he had worked with for 3 years, a man who had seen him through sold-out stadiums and private breakdowns and everything in between, and asked a single question. "Is he hurt?" The producer blinked. "Who?" "The man, the one they tackled. Is he hurt?" There was a pause. The producer looked at the head of security, who looked at his radio, who looked back at the producer. Nobody had thought to check. Nobody had considered that Michael's first concern would be for the person who had just disrupted his performance in front of 400 million people. Wait, this is where the story most people know diverges from what actually happened. The tabloids reported outrage. They reported lawsuits. They reported Michael threatening to never perform in London again. What they did not report was the conversation that took place in that corridor, or the instructions Michael gave before he would agree to any official statement. The intruder was not seriously injured. Bruises from the tackle, nothing more. He was in a holding room somewhere in the arena's basement, waiting for police to arrive and process him for trespassing. The show's lawyers wanted to press additional charges: assault, reckless endangerment, interference with a live broadcast. Michael listened to their recommendations in silence. Then he asked to speak with his personal attorney alone. Notice what was at stake. This was 1996. Michael Jackson was the most famous entertainer on the planet, but he was also fragile in ways that the public was only beginning to understand. The tabloids had already spent years dissecting his appearance, his relationships, his finances, his health. A stage invasion, especially one that could be framed as an attack, was exactly the kind of story that would dominate headlines for weeks. His team wanted to get ahead of it. They wanted to frame Michael as the victim, the survivor, the professional who had kept performing despite the threat. Michael saw it differently. Here's what he told his attorney. That night, reconstructed from notes that were never made public. He said that the man in the 14th row had not tried to hurt anyone. He had not carried a weapon. He had not threatened violence. He had simply run onto a stage, and for that, he was going to face serious legal consequences that could follow him for the rest of his life. Michael did not want to add to those consequences. He did not want his name attached to a prosecution that would make an example of someone who might have been mentally ill, or desperate, or simply caught up in a moment of terrible judgment. The lawyers pushed back, hard. They argued that letting the intruder off easy would invite copycats. They argued that Michael's safety had been compromised, and the arena needed to be held accountable. They argued that the broadcast itself, 400 million viewers watching chaos erupt during what was supposed to be a triumphant performance, had already done damage to Michael's brand that would take years to repair. Michael listened to all of it. Then he made his decision. Stop for a second and consider what that decision meant. Michael Jackson, at the peak of his fame, with every legal and financial resource in the world at his disposal, chose not to pursue maximum consequences against someone who had humiliated him on global television. He did not give interviews about the trauma of the experience. He did not demand public apologies from the arena or the awards show. He signed off on a statement that described the incident as unfortunate and said nothing more. The intruder was charged with trespassing. He spent one night in custody and was released the following morning. No additional charges were filed. No lawsuit was pursued. Within a week, the story had faded from the headlines, replaced by whatever scandal came next. But here is what lingered. Listen to the crew members who were there that night, and they will tell you about the moment they realized what Michael was doing. He was not just refusing to escalate. He was actively protecting someone who had wronged him, absorbing the damage rather than redirecting it. For a man who had spent his entire life in the public eye, who had been scrutinized and criticized and torn apart by strangers who thought they knew him, that choice was almost incomprehensible. The backup dancers talked about it for years. They had seen Michael on stage through pyrotechnic malfunctions and equipment failures and fans collapsing in the pit from heat exhaustion. They had seen him lose his voice mid-song and keep going, mouthing the words until his vocal cords recovered. They had seen him perform through injuries that would have sent other artists to the hospital. But they had never seen him extend grace to someone who had threatened his safety, and they did not understand how he could do it so easily. Remember that cherry picker. 30 feet in the air, swaying slightly in the artificial wind, with a stranger somewhere below, and no way down except to trust that the people operating the machinery would make the right call. That was Michael's reality for 47 seconds. He could have screamed for them to bring him down immediately. He could have stopped the song, stopped the broadcast, forced everyone to acknowledge that something had gone wrong. Instead, he held his position and kept singing, because he understood something that most people never learn. The show is never really about you. It is about the people watching, the 15,000 in the arena, the 400 million at home, the little girl in Tokyo staying up past her bedtime, the teenager in Lagos recording the broadcast on a VHS tape, the grandmother in Buenos Aires who remembered seeing Michael on television 20 years earlier and wanted to see him one more time. For all of them, the song had to continue. The story had to reach its ending. The man in the air had to land safely and walk away, because that was the only version of events that would let them sleep peacefully that night. Michael knew this. He had always known it. And in the 47 seconds when everything could have fallen apart, he held the line. Picture him in the dressing room afterward, sitting in front of the mirror with his costume half removed, staring at his own reflection while the arena emptied and the crew began breaking down the stage. His hands had stopped shaking, but the adrenaline was still there, buzzing under his skin like electricity. He would not sleep that night. He rarely slept after performances anyway. The energy took hours to dissipate, leaving him wired and restless in hotel rooms that all looked the same. But this night was different. This night, he kept replaying those 47 seconds, wondering if he had made the right call, wondering what would have happened if he hadn't grabbed that arm, wondering what the world would have looked like if the man had fallen and the whole thing had come crashing down. He never got an answer. Some questions don't have answers. They just have consequences rippling outward through time, shaping decisions that haven't been made yet and lives that haven't been lived. The intruder was never heard from again. He gave no interviews, wrote no books, made no attempt to capitalize on his 15 seconds of global notoriety. Whatever had driven him to vault over that barrier and sprint towards the stage, he kept it to himself. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was grateful. Maybe he simply moved on with his life, carrying the memory of that night like a scar that only he could see. And Michael? Michael flew to the next city, rehearsed the next show, stood on the next stage in front of the next crowd. He performed the same song dozens more times over the following year, rising into the air on the same cherry picker, trusting the same crew, facing the same darkness. Each time, he remembered those 47 seconds. Each time, he chose to keep singing anyway. That is what they never write about in the tabloids. The quiet acts of courage that happen when no one is watching, or when everyone is watching and nobody understands what they are seeing. The decision to reach down and grab a stranger's arm when every instinct screams to pull away. The choice to protect someone who has wronged you, not because they deserve it, but because vengeance is heavier than forgiveness, and you are tired of carrying weight that does not belong to you. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. Some nights, when the performances are over and the lights have dimmed and the crowds have gone home, the only thing left is the memory of what you chose to do when everything was falling apart. Michael made his choice in those 47 seconds, and whatever else the world said about him, whatever headlines they wrote, whatever judgments they passed, that choice belonged to him alone. If you want to hear about the night everything went wrong in Munich, tell me in the comments.